Usually when you set out on a journey, um, there's an expectation of a destination.
Right, yeah, a specific endpoint.
Exactly. You pack your bags, you punch an address into the GPS, and you just drive until that digital voice finally says, you have arrived.
Yeah, it's definitive. I mean, it's a binary state, really. You are either at your destination or you're still in transit.
Right. There's a very clear line separating the two. But imagine you're driving, and the GPS keeps like quietly updating the final destination while you're already flying down the highway at 70 miles an hour.
Oh, man, that sounds exhausting.
It is. Suddenly, quick weekend trip to the next town turns into this cross-country expedition.
Hmm.
The gas tank is constantly draining,
Yeah.
and nobody in the car seems to know when they can actually put the vehicle in park.
Yeah, that is the absolute definition of strategic drift.
Right.
You're moving fast, you're burning through resources, but you have no actual idea where you are going anymore.
And that feeling of endless motion is exactly what we are dissecting today in this really profound piece of analysis. It's titled The Drift of War, The Danger of Undefined Objectives.
It's a heavy one.
It really is. This text examines the unfolding conflict involving the United States, Israel, and Iran, and it asks this very unsettling question. What happens when the goals of a war become dangerously elastic?
Yeah, it's a crucial question.
But, before we really dig into the mechanics of this, I need to set some ground rules for our deep dive today.
Good call.
Yeah, we are dealing with a highly sensitive, ongoing global conflict here. And I want to be super clear to you, our listener. Our goal here isn't to take a left-wing or right-wing stance or
Hmm.
to endorse the author's politics whatsoever.
No, not at all. We're strictly neutral on this.
Exactly. Our job is just to hold this text up to the light, take it apart impartially,
Yeah.
and, see how the author builds their argument about military strategy and political communication.
Right. We are looking entirely at the architecture of the author's argument. And the core thesis here is that in war, clarity is a safeguard. Without clearly defined objectives, conflicts risk drifting into this endless, self-sustaining inertia.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And to understand how a war loses its boundaries, we have to look at how it begins, which is almost always with an illusion of structure.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Mhm.
Because the text points out that at the beginning of this conflict involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran, the goals were framed in very familiar, almost rehearsed terms.
Yeah, the classic talking points.
Exactly. You hear leaders using phrases like neutralize Iran's military capabilities or curb its nuclear ambitions
Mhm.
and stabilize a volatile region.
Right. And on the surface, those sound like necessary, actionable items. They convey a real sense of immediate purpose.
They do. They sound very decisive.
But the author argues they are actually broad enough to mean almost anything.
How so?
Well, think about a phrase like stabilize a volatile region. What does that actually look like on a map? I mean, how do you measure stability? At first glance, the mission appeared highly structured. The initial language was all about precision strikes and strategic deterrence.
So keeping it contained.
Exactly. It was explicitly framed as a campaign designed not for occupation, but for containment.
But then the source points out how rapidly that language shifts. I mean, it happens fast.
Almost overnight sometimes?
Yeah. Within weeks, officials go from talking about targeted containment to speaking about weakening broader regional influence.
Right.
And then come the whispers, sometimes explicit, sometimes carefully avoided, about actual regime change.
Which is a massive leap.
A huge leap. I was trying to think of how to visualize this creeping expansion for you, and it's like hiring a contractor for a kitchen renovation.
Okay, I like this.
Right, so you agree that the goal is containment. Let's just update the cabinets and the countertops, keep it simple.
Just a quick refresh.
Exactly. But because the blueprint was vague from day one, within a few weeks, the contractors are tearing up the foundation of the house and replacing the roof. Right, that's the regime change part. And the crazy thing is, they're still handing you the bill, calling it a kitchen update.
That kitchen analogy perfectly captures the mechanism at work here.
It's wild.
It is. And the author stresses that this expansion of the project isn't like a failure of communication by the leaders. It's a documented, predictable pattern.
Wait, so it's a known thing.
Oh, absolutely. When objectives expand without being clearly redefined, the war itself becomes what the text calls elastic.
Elastic.
Yeah, it stretches to accommodate new justifications, new threats, and critically new costs. What began as a highly targeted, contained campaign quietly evolves into something entirely open-ended.
And the military briefings are a perfect example of this elasticity. The text highlights this massive disconnect between what is reported and what is actually achieved.
Yeah, this is where we see how the illusion of progress is maintained.
Right.
Imagine a general standing at a podium, right, showing satellite imagery of a blown-up bridge or a destroyed weapons facility.
A classic press conference.
Exactly. And to the public watching on television, it looks like a win. A facility was destroyed, a supply line was cut.
Tangible results.
But what those briefings rarely show is how blowing up that specific bridge actually achieves the overarching goal of regional stability.
Oh, interesting.
They provide a micro victory to mask a macro stagnation.
Okay, I want to push back on the author's premise here for a second, just to play devil's advocate.
Go for it.
In the literal fog of war, isn't rigid planning just as dangerous as no planning at all?
That is a very fair point.
I mean, how do you set strict, immovable benchmarks when the enemy you're fighting is constantly adapting and changing tactics? If you lock yourself into a rigid goal, couldn't that lead to a massive tactical disaster?
What's fascinating here is that the author actually agrees with that specific concern.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The text totally acknowledges the theoretical benefits of ambiguity. By avoiding rigid goals, leaders retain flexibility.
I can pivot?
Exactly. They can adjust their strategy as conditions change on the ground. They can escalate if a new threat emerges, or they can retreat without having to formally admit defeat.
Right.
Flexibility is absolutely necessary in armed conflict.
But there's a catch, isn't there?
There is always a catch. The critical difference highlighted by the text is the distinction between flexibility and evasion.
Evasion.
Right. Flexibility is adjusting your path to reach a specific destination. Evasion is refusing to pick a destination at all so that you can never be accused of getting lost.
Wow. That's a huge distinction.
It is. The text argues that in this conflict, ambiguity doesn't simply allow for adaptation, it actively obscures accountability.
Because if you have no benchmarks, there is absolutely no clear way to measure failure.
Exactly.
It's like a built-in safety net for the people running the war.
Hmm.
If you never say exactly what winning looks like, no one can ever definitively prove that you are losing.
And the result is a war that can be extended indefinitely, justified continuously, and evaluated entirely selectively.
It just goes on and on.
Yeah, it transforms from a problem with a solution into a permanent state of managed conflict.
So if the destination keeps changing, what happens when the people driving the car aren't even looking at the same map?
Yeah, that's a whole other layer of complexity.
Because the text really digs into the dynamic between the United States and Israel here. We have two nations aligned in a conflict, but they aren't even using the same measuring stick for what this war is supposed to achieve.
No, not at all. The reality is that the U.S. and Israel are aligned, but they are far from identical in their strategic priorities.
Right.
Their stakes in this conflict are fundamentally different, and that misalignment impacts every facet of the campaign.
How does the text break down Israel's stakes?
For Israel, the text describes the stakes as immediate and existential. This is happening in their geographical backyard.
Right there.
Exactly. The focus is on neutralizing threats as completely as possible. It's about reshaping the entire regional balance of power in ways that ensure their long-term security. It is a matter of pure survival.
Bringing it back to our contractor analogy, it's like two people paying for that kitchen remodel, but one of them wants to live in the house forever and build a safe family home.
Yes.
And the other partner, in this case the United States, has a completely different calculus.
Completely different. The American stakes involve the immediate military outcomes in the Middle East, certainly, but they also involve global economic stability, the management of international alliances, and, intense domestic political pressure back home.
Right, the big picture.
The U.S. is looking at the conflict through a global macroeconomic lens.
Now, the text notes that these goals aren't completely conflicting. I mean, it's not like the U.S. and Israel want opposite things.
Right, they aren't enemies.
But they aren't perfectly aligned either.
And we can see how this practically impacts battlefield decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine a scenario where a specific target is identified.
Yeah.
One ally, focused on immediate survival, sees destroying that target as a non-negotiable necessity to neutralize a direct threat.
They have to take it out.
Right. But the other ally, focused on global economics, looks at that exact same target and sees a strike that could trigger a massive spike in global oil prices or anger a neighboring trade partner.
Oh, man. So the intelligence sharing becomes strained.
Very strained. The tactical negotiations become incredibly muddy because the ultimate finish lines are in two completely different places.
Here's where it gets really interesting. How bizarre is it to coordinate massive military strikes when the overall strategy shifts depending purely on who is defining the mission at that exact moment?
This raises an important question, one the text forces us to consider. How can you ever collectively declare a war won when one ally is looking for absolute existential security and the other ally is trying to balance global shipping routes and domestic election cycles?
You can't.
Exactly. The finish line is an optical illusion, which means the war just continues. And as it continues, it inevitably expands into new territories and new domains.
So, if the war is expanding infinitely and the Allies can't agree on a finish line, who actually benefits from that?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because it turns out there is a massive political upside to a moving target. And this brings us to the domestic shield.
Right, the political cover.
Yeah. The text describes how what began as targeted military action evolves into a much broader confrontation. We're talking about proxy conflicts, rising maritime tensions, and massive economic ripple effects extending far beyond the Middle East.
The ripple effects are huge.
And with each of those escalations comes a brand new justification for the war. Suddenly, the war isn't just about neutralizing military capabilities. It's about securing international shipping lanes.
It's about responding to indirect attacks from proxy groups.
Exactly. It's about preventing a broader regional collapse.
And the author concedes that these may all be valid concerns.
Sure.
But taken together, they create an ever-shifting rationale. And this shifting rationale serves a very specific political purpose.
Tell me.
The text points out a harsh reality, clear objectives carry immense political risk.
I want you, the listener, to think about the news you consume on a daily basis. How often do you hear leaders claim progress or momentum in a conflict without ever actually telling you what the final finish line looks like?
All the time.
Right. Imagine a politician standing at a press conference podium. 6 months ago, they stood there and said the military was deploying to dismantle a specific nuclear facility.
Very clear goal.
But today, that same politician stands at the same podium and says the military is now operating to secure a maritime economic zone 50 miles away. And they use words like adaptability and evolving threat environment.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author's logic is undeniable. If a goal is clearly stated, say, we will eliminate this specific threat by this specific date, it can be clearly missed.
You can objectively fail.
Exactly. Vague objectives offer what the text calls political insulation.
Ah, political insulation.
It protects leaders from the judgment of failure. They can adjust the narrative without ever having to step up to a podium and admit a miscalculation.
Wait, I'm realizing the bizarre mechanism at play here. The purpose of the war is constantly being redefined by the consequences of the war itself.
Yes.
It's a feedback loop.
Yes.
We have to keep fighting to fix the new problems that were created by the fighting.
That feedback loop is the engine of strategic drift. You deploy forces to neutralize a threat. The deployment disrupts global shipping, so you deploy more forces to protect the shipping lanes.
Which triggers a proxy group to attack your naval assets.
Right, so you launch a new campaign to neutralize the proxy group.
And the original objective is completely buried under the immediate demands of managing the new crises.
Exactly.
But the text is very clear that this political insulation comes at a steep cost, which is the erosion of public trust.
Yeah, the public isn't blind.
No. When the purpose of a war becomes too complex or difficult to explain, support weakens. Skepticism grows when the mission mysteriously appears to shift right as it approaches a point of evaluation.
People notice when the goalposts move.
Yeah, and when the public realizes those goalposts have been moved again, faith in the leadership just evaporates.
Which leaves leaders managing a forever war with dwindling domestic support.
So what does this all mean? I mean, the author reminds us that this isn't uncharted territory, right? We have modern historical precedents for this type of drift.
Oh, yeah. Modern history offers multiple examples of conflicts where unclear objectives led to prolonged engagement. Wars that began with total confidence but gradually drifted into ambiguity.
Well, like Vietnam or Afghanistan.
Exactly. You end up with a situation where tactical victories accumulate, you're winning individual battles, but strategic clarity never emerges.
You win the fights, but you don't win the war.
Precisely.
Because the greatest danger in this conflict, according to the text, isn't actually escalation. It is inertia.
Inertia.
Yeah. A war that lacks clearly defined objectives doesn't necessarily end. It just continues. It adapts. It constantly justifies itself.
Over time, it becomes less about achieving a specific desired outcome and much more about just managing an ongoing violent reality.
That is how wars lose their boundaries. Not with a single dramatic decision, but with the gradual, almost imperceptible disappearance of limits.
The text concludes with a really chilling thought on that note.
Yeah.
The question is no longer whether the U.S. and Israel can achieve their objectives in Iran. The real question is whether those objectives will ever be clearly defined in the first place.
Wow.
The author puts it perfectly. They say, without that clarity, strategy becomes narrative, success becomes interpretation, and the end becomes optional.
The end becomes optional, man. That is a haunting phrase.
Really is.
It totally reframes everything you read in the headlines.
It leaves me with a final thought, something for you to mull over as we wrap up today's deep dive.
Let's hear it.
We talked about that feedback loop earlier, how a war's purpose is constantly redefined by the consequences of the war itself.
Right?
Like having to deploy naval assets to secure shipping lanes that were only threatened because of the conflict in the first place.
At what point does the war stop being a tool used by leaders to achieve a policy and instead become an autonomous system that dictates policy to the leaders?
Oh, that's heavy.
When does the war start running the government instead of the government running the war?
That is the ultimate danger of the drift. You build a machine to solve a problem, and eventually, the machine demands all of your resources just to keep itself running.
It goes right back to that car trip we talked about at the very beginning.
Oh, the GPS.
Yeah. The GPS keeps updating, the road keeps stretching out in front of you, the passengers are arguing about why you even left the house, and nobody has the courage to just reach over, turn off the engine, and admit you're lost,
You just keep driving because driving feels like progress.
even if you're going in circles.
Hmm.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this gave you a new lens to view the news through. Keep asking questions, keep looking for the why behind the headlines, and we will catch you next time.